In January 1977, a powerful industry went into panic mode. For the first time ever, the American government recommended that people eat less of something: meat. But this was a big problem for the meat industry, because this recommendation wouldn't only impact what Americans choose to eat in their day-to-day life, but it could have implications for what's taught in schools, what's served in hospitals. Military rations and federal food programs decrease consumption of meat? No, this threatens the loss of millions of dollars. The meat industry responded immediately. Political favours were exchanged and pressure mounted for the report to be changed. At a hearing, the president of the National Cattlemen's Association said 6 words that cut to the core of the food industry's priorities better than I ever could. Decrease is a bad word, Senator. And just like that, a single sentence, one that could have changed the American diet, was erased forever and replaced with something more favourable to the powers that be. But the meat industry's success in changing that report didn't mark the end of their problem, because the studies linking red meat to chronic disease kept coming in, and the public, well, they were starting to worry. Enter the National Pork Board. In 1987, they came up with a marketing plan that would be so effective, it would lead to an astonishing 20% increase in the amount of pork being eaten in the United States. What do you do when people are buying less of your product due to concern for the health risks associated with red meat? What they did was genius.
Another meal made simple with pork. Slice it, sauté it, and smother it. Whatever goes on top, it's easy as 1, 2, 3. Pork, the other white meat.
By rebranding pork as a white meat, they strategically distanced it from the riding tide of health concerns associated with red meat. Now, of course, pork was still technically a red meat and defined as such by the scientific literature. But does that really matter if the people buying your product believe otherwise? After just 10 weeks of running ads in targeted cities, the number of people who believed that pork was a white meat jumped from 12% to 72%, and sales spiked.
It's the life of the party, the word on the street. It's in, it's always, and it's about time. It's where we're at, it's what you want, it's on your mind, it's in your mouth, it's pork, and it's catching on. The other white meat. Taste what's next.
But when it comes to marketing, the meat industry has a secret weapon that has had a disproportionate influence on deceiving us, and I'll reveal what exactly that secret weapon is at the very end of this video. Because first I want to point out that Big Meat doesn't only rely on marketing. Time and time again, they've illustrated their power in politics. Now, we've already seen how they pressured the government in the 70s, but fast forward to 2015 and they were facing something even bigger. But first, you need to understand something important. You've probably seen one of these. They're taught in schools, doctors refer to them, these things are everywhere. The US government releases new versions of these dietary guidelines every 5 years, and these guidelines are shaped by the United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA. The USDA is responsible for regulating the meat industry and for setting dietary guidelines that promote health. But here's the problem. The USDA is also responsible for promoting and protecting the meat and dairy industry, which means the very same agency that's telling you what's healthy is also working to sell you more meat. The USDA oversees the Cattlemen's Beef Promotion and Research Board, and they're responsible for ads like this.
Another day is drawing to a close, and all kinds of people all over the country are heading home for dinner. And no matter who they are, or what they do, or where they make their homes, chances are their favorite dinners have at least one thing in common. Beef. It's what's for dinner.
But it gets worse, because if you're wondering why the USDA seems to favour the meat industry, then one thing you need to know is that in many cases, they're literally the same people. Take Tom Vilsack. If his name sounds familiar to you, It's because he served 2 terms as US Secretary of Agriculture. The first one ran from 2009 to 2017 under Obama, and the second term went from 2021 to 2025 under President Biden. But there were 4 years in between those terms, so you might find yourself curious as to what he was doing in that time. He was president and CEO of the US Dairy Export Council, a trade group that is literally dedicated to promoting and expanding dairy sales. And that seems like quite a conflict of interest. But let's go back to the USDA's guidelines, because in 2015, the government's top nutrition panel was preparing its latest recommendations. But this time, they did something that no advisory committee had ever done before. They didn't just look at food and health, they also looked at the evidence on food and sustainability. And their report stated clearly, a dietary pattern that is higher in plant-based foods and lower in animal-based foods is more health-promoting and is associated with lesser environmental impact than the current US diet. The moment this was made public, Big Meat mobilized and more than $1 million was spent on political lobbying to stop the sustainability recommendation from making it into the final guidelines. When the final version was released, surprise, surprise, all references to eating less meat for environmental reasons were missing. For decades, there has been a pattern of the meat industry interfering in government guidelines. In her book, Food Politics, Marion Nestle, a food studies professor, describes how she was brought into the American government in the 1980s to work on the Surgeon General's report on nutrition and health. And on her very first day, she was told in no uncertain terms, no matter what the research indicated, the report could not recommend eat less meat. It was explained to her that if they did make that recommendation, the meat industry would complain to their beneficiaries in Congress, and the report would never be published. But even if government guidelines never recommend eating less meat for health or environmental reasons, there is that other thing that might turn people away from buying their products. Have you ever noticed how packaging and advertising for animal products consistently shows healthy animals in the outdoors with lots of space? And when you see packaging like this, with the American Humane certification on it, what kind of standards of animal welfare do you expect? Well, what if I told you that this label can be used by companies that breed birds to grow so fast that they're in constant pain, that are kept in conditions of extreme overcrowding, and what's even more shocking is that American Humane will give its stamp of approval even if the birds are killed using the controversial method of live shackle slaughter. So to be clear, the process here is that the birds are like dipped into water, and when they hit that water, they're supposed to get an electric shock that renders them unconscious.
That's correct, yeah, just their heads. But what often happens, can you see also, this is a great picture, there's a wing hanging down at the same level as the heads. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Right, now that wing is going to enter the water bath first. So instead of getting electric shock that goes from the head to the feet, which is what you want to be doing, so that's the shock that causes them to go unconscious, it's the wing is going to hit the water first. It's going to get a pre-stun electric shock. So it's going to get an electric shock, then its head may go in the water, and then it'll be stunned. Some of those birds are going to miss the water bath, and they're the ones that end up not getting a stun properly, may even only get their neck partially cut while they're still completely conscious, and could end up in the scalding tank. And the scalding tank's there to remove feathers, but we know 2 to 3% of birds end up in there still while they're still conscious, in the scalding tank.
If we're talking about like 2 to 3% of animals, when you consider the scale of the individuals going through the process, it's actually like millions of individuals being boiled alive. Okay, hold up. What does a company actually have to do if it wants to make a welfare claim on its packaging, like humanely raised? Well, they have to fill out a form explaining how their animals are raised, how they supposedly meet their claim, and whether they've been certified by an independent organisation, which, by the way, is optional. But here's the thing that absolutely blew my mind. The USDA never does any surprise audits. In fact, they don't do any audits at all. They simply take the company's word for it. Over the last decade, the Animal Welfare Institute has been requesting from the USDA the applications that these meat companies are submitting, and they released a report with their findings that for the overwhelming majority of applications, there were either no records at all, or the justifications for the labels had little or no relevance to animal welfare. The AWI report goes on to state that the USDA are allowing the use of claims like humanely raised, even when the animals are raised under conventional industry conditions. that means factory farming. And this points to a bigger problem, and one that I personally find a lot more disturbing than all of the deceptive marketing and political interference. And it's that big meat is largely being left alone to do whatever they want to animals. And whenever there is a trade-off between maximizing profit and protecting animal welfare, there's only one winner. I mean, just listen to some of the things that it is legal and extremely common for these companies to do to animals in the United States. Piglets have their testicles ripped off without any pain relief. Male chicks in the egg industry are being ground up alive or suffocated in bags. Mother pigs are kept in gestation crates where they can't even turn around. I mean, these things read like middle-aged torture techniques. And not only is the USDA allowing it to happen, but by having such poor regulation around food packaging and advertising, they're helping these companies to trick consumers into buying a fairy tale, that the animals they eat are living good lives and dying painlessly. I'm from the UK, which is a self-proclaimed nation of animal lovers, and it's often said that we have some of the best animal welfare laws in the world, and we are more progressive than most other countries. But take chickens, for example. The overwhelming majority of chickens raised for meat in the UK have been selectively bred to grow unnaturally fast to reach slaughter weight within 6 weeks. I went to a British chicken farm to see this for myself, and I entered a shed with over 40,000 birds, many of whom were completely unable to walk. In fact, the selective breeding is so extreme that around 80 million of them die every year in the UK without ever making it off the farm. It's common for the birds to just turn over on their backs and die of a heart attack. And despite our animal-loving identity, around 85% of all farmed animals in the UK live in intensive factory farms. And even though our legislation is better than most, there's a huge problem with the enforcement of that legislation. A report by the Animal Law Foundation and Animal Equality found that only around 2.5% of farms in the UK were actually inspected. And when non-compliance was found in a farm or a slaughterhouse, less than 1% of those instances actually resulted in a prosecution. The bottom line is that meat companies are being trusted to do right by animals. And any industry that's accepting of things like breeding chickens to grow so fast that they can't even walk, well, I think vegans, vegetarians, and meat eaters alike can all surely agree that that industry cannot and must not be trusted to do right by animals. And the harsh reality of factory farming began causing some problems for big meat. Because in the 1990s and 2000s, non-profits started infiltrating factory farms using hidden cameras to document cruelty. And how did the industry respond? Well, one option, of course, would be to change the practices. But the system in place is set up to optimize for profit. Changing the practices would, in most cases, mean less profit. They had another idea.
Factory farming, we talked about this yesterday. They have Ag-gag laws, a couple days ago with Russell Crowe, rather. Ag-gag laws prevent people from detailing the horrific conditions which these animals live in. If you film it, if you're a worker there and you're like, this is horrific, I'm going to film this and out this place, you'll go to jail, which is insane.
When the meat industry is exposed for cruelty, the response is not to stop abusing animals. It's to put legislation in place that makes it easier to hide. And how does this work? Well, industry-backed lobbying groups draft these bills and hand them to friendly lawmakers, many of whom, by the way, receive campaign donations from Big Ag, claiming the laws are necessary to protect family farms from radical activists, even though the real beneficiaries are massive factory farming corporations, making it illegal to expose the very abuses they don't want the public to see. But the biggest question isn't how the meat industry gets these laws passed, it's why they need them in the first place. If what's happening is humane, as their marketing suggests, then why do they need laws that prevent people from seeing it? But even before Ag-gag laws, it's been very hard to get any justice for animal abuse on farms. One example I'll never forget comes from the 2009 HBO documentary Death on a Factory Farm. An investigator filmed a farm where they were killing sick pigs by wrapping a chain around their neck, lifting them up on a forklift, and hanging them. It went to court, and the pork industry had a friendly vet on board to try and defend the slaughter method of hanging.
Have you ever been involved providing euthanasia, as according to this booklet?
Am I providing euthanasia to farms?
Yeah.
I do that on occasion, yes, sir.
And what method do you use? I'm just curious.
If I'm collecting tissues from pigs, I choose to use the injection method.
I'm going to ask you to look at this clip real quick. Does that pig appear to be suffering?
I don't know whether it's suffering or not.
Well, you're here testifying as an expert. Is that pig suffering?
Tell me what the pig was before it came to this state.
It's not my question to you, sir. You're watching that video.
Objection. Overruled, Counselor.
You're watching this video, sir. You saw that pig being hung and that pig being struggling. Was that pig suffering?
I can't determine if it was suffering because we just can't tell very easily on that definition.
Is that a proper method of providing euthanasia?
If it is accomplishing asphyxia in a very short time period, yes, sir.
Just from what you observed, was that proper manner to provide euthanasia?
Objection.
Counsel, overruled. You've had plenty of latitude, counsel, to ask you questions. The same is being accorded to the state in cross-examining your witness.
Understood. Thank you, Your Honor.
Restate your question.
Yes, sir. Is that a proper manner of euthanasia?
Yes, sir.
It was that animal suffering?
I don't think it was.
They were found not guilty of animal torture. The judge found the method distasteful, but defended it as the reality of producing pork for consumption. For decades, Big Meat has built an empire on carefully crafted illusions. They've influenced government guidelines and sanitized the horrors of factory farming with clever marketing. And when that wasn't enough and the fairy tale was exposed, they silenced the truth with ag-gag laws and corporate lobbying. They've spent millions ensuring that the real story of meat, the impact on our health, the environment, and the animals themselves, remains hidden. But Big Meat's power isn't just built on money, it's built on public perception. That's why they try so hard to control it. It's built on us believing their story. Which brings me to the meat industry's biggest secret weapon. The one thing that makes all of these marketing tricks so convincing is that we want to believe it. We want the fairy tale to be true. When I was a teenager, I used to argue with my Muslim friend about halal meat, which can sometimes involve slaughter of animals without prior stunning. And he used to say to me, "But you're still killing them. You know, how can you take the moral high ground?" And I would say something like, well, look, if an animal has a good life and then one day they get a gun to the back of the head and they don't know anything about it and they die painlessly, then I think I'm okay with that. And when I look back to that now, I realize that I had no idea about what was happening to animals in the meat industry. I didn't know if they had good lives, and I certainly didn't know about the different slaughter methods that we used. I was using the idea of a humane system as a way to feel better about my consumption of factory farmed animals. And that kind of rationalization is only made possible because of the disconnect between the meat that we see and the process of making it. And the meat industry feeds in to this disconnect. They try to make it illegal to show the process. They make adverts that make us feel good. But these feel-good adverts start to look completely insane when you become aware of the underbelly of suffering that these companies are hiding. What if we had an advert that broke through the disconnect, rather than encouraging it?
It's the life of the party, the word on the street. It's in, it's always, and it's about time. It's where we're at, it's what you want, it's on your mind, it's in your mouth, it's pork, and it's catching on. The other white meat. Taste what's next.